I think it might be useful to talk about Trump's attorney's defense. So Donald Trump is in pretty hot water. He's on his third indictment, possibly going to have a fourth indictment if the indictment in Georgia goes along and processes and turns into another indictment. He's indicted on one thing by Alvin Bragg in New York in reference to paying off a porn star to stay quiet during an election. He's indicted on a second count. Oh my gosh, there's so many indictments. I'm actually forgetting the indictments. What's the second indictment for? Oh yes. The second indictment has to do with the mishandling of classified documents. And the third indictment, the most recent indictment, has to do with attacks on democracy, infringing on people's right to vote, basically making their vote be meaningless, trying to steal the election is the main theme. There's 4 separate charges, but what all connects them is that he was either conspiring to or engaging in behavior to steal the 2020 election. Whether it was trying to intimidate Georgian election officials in order to change the votes to make him win, whether it was trying to organize fake electors when he knew that he had lost the election in order to challenge the real electors, whether it was requesting, and Mike Pence recently admitted this publicly, whether it was directly requesting Mike Pence just reject the direct votes of the American people, reject the electors outright and send it back to the states, so then maybe Trump can convince the state legislators across the country to vote in favor of him when they do a redo instead of aligning with the original electors, which would mean Donald Trump could stay in office even if he had lost the election, because the majority of state governments at the time were controlled by the Republican Party. And there's so many different elements to this. I'm only mentioning a few. I'm not talking about the draft executive orders, which was meant to give the presidency the power to seize voting machines with the military. There's so much to this story, and there's already a 45-page indictment out, which you guys can go read if you want to get more context. And only more evidence is going to be brought forward, especially since a lot of unindicted co-conspirators are going to have to testify. Mike Pence is most likely going to have to testify. A lot of people in Trump's inner circle, like his former chief of staff, not Mark Meadows, not Mark Matthews. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot his chief of staff's names. Donald Trump. It's Mark something. Chief of staff. I know this guy's going to testify. It doesn't say. Mark Meadows. It is Mark Meadows. I was right. I was just deluding myself into thinking I was wrong. Anyway, I wanted to watch Donald Trump's lawyer attempt to defend himself on these charges. Let's see.
Donald Trump's attorney doubling down on his argument that Trump's request to then Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the election is within his rights of free speech, saying it all comes down to the way he asked.
When it comes to political speech, you can not only advocate for a position, but you can take action. You can petition. You can ask even your vice president to pause the vote for a period of time in order to allow the states to recertify.
But you can't break the law, which is what this indictment alleges.
What was it?
It alleges that he caused actions like approving fake.
What was it?
I'll tell you what the indictment. I'll tell you what the indictment.
What was that?
I'll tell you what the indictment says. The indictment.
Dude, I got so much critique for so long from so many people when I was hosting Hippy Dippy, my roundtable debate show, for being too childish or making politics into blood sports and wrestling. I said this at the time, and it's only become more true since then. I didn't make politics into blood sports and wrestling. Politics is currently in American media blood sports and wrestling. It's what brings in the viewership. It's what CNN loves. It's what Trump's teams love, because they love to get into the dirt. And if they don't have to talk about the facts, but can just talk about wide sweeping narratives and punchy rhetoric, then that's going to help their defense, or at least help their narrative as they go into the 2024 election. Because I firmly believe Donald Trump's plan and the plan of his lawyers isn't to win the case right now. Right now, all of Donald Trump's team has been doing their best to delay the trial for as long as possible. Try to knock it down a few months down the road and just see if they can delay it until after the election. Because if they could delay it till after the election, then they can deal with it from the position of president-elect, which gives them a lot more power to, get themselves off. And this is why the Trump team is working with these broad narratives and trying to delay the election, trying to delay the trial while also claiming innocence. Because if I was accused of murder on the campaign trail, I would want the trial to end as quick as possible so I could prove I was innocent before people went to the polls and voted for me. Because if there was a question mark over whether I was a murderer over the election, that could obviously hurt my election chances. And so if I could dissuade people from thinking that or provide evidence of the contrary, I would 100% want to do that. But Donald Trump's strategy isn't to do that. It's to delay the trial for as fast as possible. You know, people have a right to a speedy trial, but they're trying to deny themselves that right as hard as possible.
Statement says that he attempted to cause actions like approving fake electors, opening sham fraud investigations, and obstructing the certification of the election. Whether he can prove that, that's going to happen in the trial. I'm just saying what's in the indictment.
Yeah, but Right, and let me take the first thing, the question about electors, okay? Alternate electors are used in every 4-year cycles, okay? The Senate parliamentarian acknowledged to Vice President Pence that they always receive protest alternate electors. None of those electors were counted.
The problem is the organization of alternate electors to get people who knew they weren't the real electors and to sign documents stating that they were the true electors in order to try to go to these conferences across the country and replace the real electors, and colluding with people across the whole country, Republican Party officials who stated that they were the real electors, knowing that they weren't, in order to go in hand with the scheme. That is not something that happens every election. Hillary Clinton did not scramble to try to capture all the electors and push a bunch of fake electors in order to try to win the election in 2016 when she lost. That didn't happen. And that's on top of the fact that a lot of the charges has to do with the fact that it's not a question of freedom of expression on whether Donald Trump's asking like openly, oh, could you do this? Or you know, just saying things that are false, which is, you know, you can just say things that are false, is that he was telling people to go out and try to stop Joe Biden from being the next president, from being elected the next president, from being certified as the next president, even though he knew that he lost. And he had been told multiple times by his own officials that there is no evidence of widespread fraud. There is no evidence that the election was stolen. But he kept going because he wanted to win. And that's not surprising, considering on the campaign trail, Donald Trump openly said that if I lose the election, it's rigged. He was never going to accept a loss.
Vice President Pence was completely aware of the nature of the
They weren't counted because Mike Pence rejected the scheme. That's why they weren't counted.
Absolutely, and that's how the of course, and that's how the political process works. But there was no defrauding, there was no trickery, there was no deceit.
Because if Mike Pence had said yes, then that's exactly what would have happened.
No, because
and that's only one.
Because thankfully, with freedom of the press, you have to let me finish, though, because, you know, no, but you asked me a question, and I hope you can let me finish, because the government alleges deceit or trickery, and all of this played out in the open. It's all free speech. There was a Supreme Court decision, Hammerschmidt, which is right on point, that says when you're exercising free speech, you're not.
Oh, I remember that. I remember the Hammerschmidt decision. It said, if you tell a hitman to go kill someone, or you say it would be cool if this person died, Mr. Hitman, and then they go kill that person, you're fine. You just did a free speech. That's different.
Not engaging in a fraud on the government, and that's what, unfortunately, most people don't understand.
That's just one example of the actions. That's just one example of the actions in this indictment.
But you're entitled.
And this is a long list that we've compiled from the indictment. I mean, it's more than a dozen, not speech, actions that the former president allegedly took.
Like what?
I mean, where do I even start?
What? Tell me.
Asking the Arizona speaker to interfere with ascertaining Arizona's electors. The Justice Department to
asking a speech.
Okay, I'm gonna let that ring out a few more moments, and then I'll address the obvious elephant in the room.
But But
That's
any,
the
but
point.
any alleged,
Asking is speech.
but any alleged, almost all alleged criminal activity has to do with using words and as speech.
No,
and that's listen.
What you don't,
this is obviously the defense that you're going to use, and it will be fascinating.
It's so silly. I mean, look, if Donald Trump was just like, look, the election was stolen, yada yada yada, no, then it would be one thing. But it was the election was stolen, even though I've been told by multiple sources that it wasn't, and I have good reason to believe it wasn't, and I'm going to attempt to steal it my way. And I'm going to ask people to do actions to steal it my way, even though I knew the election wasn't stolen from the cavalcade of evidence provided to me by multiple state officials. And we have audio and testimony of people telling Donald Trump that these claims that he was pushing were just complete nonsense. If we hold up the standard that, oh, he asked somebody else to do something, that's asking, is all free speech. Then if I am a man and I go to a hitman and ask them to kill my wife, is that a crime? I just use my free speech. I just use my freedom of expression. Obviously, there's a difference in the crime. There's a difference in the circumstances. But all I'm trying to express to you is, just because he said words does not mean that it's covered by freedom of expression if it's conspiracy to commit a crime.
To see how it works out in a court of law. I want to move on to another issue.
No, I got to tell you though. But you make an interesting point, because you're saying that asking is action. No, asking is aspirational. Asking is not action. It's core free speech. The press should be defending free speech in this case.
Let's talk about something else that you've repeatedly said, and that is that the former president ultimately asked his vice president only for a pause in the electoral count.
Right.
But it followed.
That was one of the things, ultimately, the final ask, right. Okay. The final ask in the ellipse speech was that, which was President Trump was following the advice of his lawyer.
Okay. The word ultimately, I've heard you use many times. The word ultimately is doing a lot of work in that sentence. I know you're intentionally using the word ultimately because at that point,
ultimately because it's the truth.
I know. You're right. It is the truth, because at that point he was asking for a pause, but it's only because for many other asks before that, what the former president was asking Mike Pence to do was to completely stop it and reject it. And that is the point that Mike Pence is making. It's that it got to the point where.
And I'm really hoping this guy is like Alex Jones's lawyer during the InfoWars versus Sandy Hook parents trial. This feels like the same kind of quality or caliber of lawyer. I know very little about him, but the more I listen to him, he sounds like that caliber of lawyer.
Okay.
He said pause because Mike Pence says, I'm not going to reject it. Sure.
Okay. So what we have, and many people don't understand this, is a memo from John Eastman, an esteemed constitutional scholar, laying out a number of scenarios. Those scenarios were presented to Vice President Pence. He considered them, and as a constitutional matter, he rejected them. One of the last and the ultimate requests that President Trump made was to pause the voting for 10 days to allow the states to recertify or certify or audit, and Mr. Pence rejected that as well. After that, there was a peaceful transition of power. So that's how the constitutional works.
Okay. What happened on January 6th was not peaceful. I want to ask you something about John Eastman, because you talked a lot about how he's a respected constitutional.
Dude, I'm sorry. Is it just me, or is this interview just like a shit show? I don't know if this is just me, but this interview just is like a complete mess. I mean, the CNN host is letting him get away with a lot of stuff. And like the little kind of like snippy, like January 6th was not peaceful. It's not pushing back against like broad strokes of what he's saying. He's getting away with a lot. And I mean, look, it's not completely her fault. The guy is interrupting quite a lot. The guy is very annoying. Yeah, but it is ultimately her show, and she needs to like, you know, kind of reel it in. She's got to rein him in as the show host.
Attorney,
the transfer of power was certainly peaceful.
Did you see what happened on January 6th? Did that look peaceful?
And by the way, Did you? I'm not saying that was in any way inappropriate, but the ultimate power of the presidency was transferred to Mr. Biden. We all know that.
All right, let's talk further now. I want to.
Man, the more I listen to Trump's lawyer's defense, the more it just feels unserious. It feels like the plan really is just get to election day. When we win, that we can touch base and we'll be Gucci. We'll be fine. We'll be able to get through it. It really does feel like this. I wonder what they're going to do if Trump loses. If Trump, let's say they get it to the general 1v1, Trump v. Biden, Trump loses, which is a real possibility. Obviously, he lost before. What's the plan for Trump then? Do they have a plan? I mean, if you're Trump, you got to know that you've lost before. There's a chance you can lose again. Unless he's really deluded and he honestly believes he actually won, which I don't believe he actually believes that. It could just be like a Hail Mary, all or nothing, you know? Like how many people talk about Netanyahu in his administration. Like, you got to avoid those corruption charges. You got to stay in power.